So I also don't think, you should feel stuck to one thing. Just because music isn't the most important part of my life now doesn't mean it's not a part of my life.
Hello, and welcome to the Orchestrating Your Career podcast. I'm your host, Rebecca for short, and I'm a clarinetist who studied at the Eastman School of Music and then went to London to get my master's and PhD, both at the Guildhall School of Music and Drama. Having shifted pathways in my own life, I love hearing about the varied careers musicians can have and how they got there. And that's precisely what we're exploring in this podcast. As I sit down with music graduates to chat about their unique musical journeys, hear their hard-earned wisdom, and learn about how they're orchestrating their own careers. For today's episode, I had the pleasure of chatting with Carrie Davids Morris. Carrie attended the Interlochen Arts Academy before receiving her bachelor's in viola performance from the Eastman School of Music. She then moved to New York City, where she got her master's at the Manhattan School of Music. As a performer and music educator, Carrie worked for 3 summers at Luzerne Music Center, taught as a viola professor at the Manhattan School of Music precollege, at Larchmont Music Academy, and played with the Glens Falls Symphony Orchestra. She then moved back to Rochester, New York, where she subs with the Rochester Philharmonic Orchestra and works as a hairstylist and curls specialist. In this interview, Carrie is incredibly open and honest about her musical journey, sharing quite frankly about her experiences and trials that she encountered and overcame along the way. When doors closed, Carrie took active steps to open new ones. Her resiliency and determination to keep going after getting knocked down, literally even in a car accident, is truly inspiring. You're listening to Carrie playing Tango by Joanne Martin, written for 3 violas. She's playing all 3 viola lines, 2 that she pre-recorded, and 1 played live in this video. Stay tuned till the end of the episode to hear some more of this performance. And now, let's get right into the interview. Hello, Carrie, and welcome to the Orchestrating Your Career podcast. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
I'm so happy for you to be here. We first met studying at the Eastman School of Music together. We were in the same class. This is our 10-year class reunion.
Oh, that's right.
Which is a little bit scary to think about, but also exciting, very cool. And it was wonderful to meet you at Eastman. In addition to being an amazing violist, you are also a hairstylist and a curl specialist. And we are actually sitting right now in the hair salon that you work at.
Yes.
And viewers of the podcast will be able to see that Carrie has amazing hair. It's beautiful hair. So maybe not entirely surprising that you went down this career pathway, but I'm really interested to hear exactly how you got here, what you do here, in addition to your viola playing. But before we get into all of that, I would love to hear just how you got started in classical music. Could you share how that began for you and why the viola?
Yeah, so the elementary school, I'm originally from Farmington, Connecticut, and the elementary school that I went to starts music in 2nd grade, the second half of 2nd grade. And so the first half of 2nd grade, they have the 3rd graders come down to the classroom, and they just do string music, strings until 5th grade. Okay. So they had a 3rd grade violin player, a 3rd grade viola player, and a 3rd grade cello player come and play for us. Now, obviously, the violin was atrocious because it's a 3rd grader playing violin. But I really wanted to play the cello. But my mom was like, well, the instrument's kind of big because I was kind of shrimpy. Yeah. And I also think there was something that had to do with her getting rid of the minivan or something like that. So I just chose the one that was left.
The middle median.
Yeah, and that's kind of how I started. I guess my mom played the clarinet in high school, and both her and my grandmother are quite crafty. My grandmother is an award-winning quilter, and my mom is really good at sewing. She's just always an arts and craft person. So probably I got my love for the arts or artistic things from there. I played throughout all of school. And then in middle school, in 7th grade, the teacher at our middle school came up to my mom and said that I would really benefit from more advanced private lessons other than just the private lessons I was getting in the town. So I went, and as it was suggested, and went and sought out a teacher at the University of Hartford pre-college. And that's where I met my middle school and partial high school teacher, Melinda Deitch. Yeah.
So I know you then went on to Interlochen.
I did.
Right? Yeah. So how did that happen? And were you already thinking at that point that music was something you really wanted to do with your career?
Yeah, so I think I was one of like the luckier people as a music. I mean, I know that people find out different times as musicians, like when we kind of want to do music. Yeah. So my first year was 7th grade with my middle school teacher, Melinda Deitch, and she suggested that I go to Luzerne Music Center. And I'd never been to like a summer music camp other than something in the town. So I went away. I like asked my parents and they gave scholarship and I went away. And it's Luzerne Music Center. It's about 15 minutes south of Lake George. Okay. So really awesome place. She was a professor there for the summer on faculty. And so I went for 2 weeks. And then the next summer went back because I begged my mom to like go back. And I think like for the first time ever, I felt like I was like, wow, this is awesome. Like all these people who are just as like serious as I am. And I met like some lifelong friends who are still my friends and that I've also crossed paths with many times throughout our musical career, which is kind of fun. You know, you see them when you're in middle school and then you don't for 10 years and then you run into them like at a university or something. So it was that summer where I went home and I told my mom I was 12 and I was like, yeah, this is what I want to do. So, that's when I was like, yep, this is where I belong. So, I mean, I don't know, you go away to like music camp and, you know, you get your first experience, like maybe being like I was principal viola and you give your first like more major solo recital because you didn't really know anyone there. I'm pretty sure I also got like my first kiss that summer too. So like, let's be real. Let's be real. I was like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. I mean, like people, you know, we'd have fun. Like there's, you know, no cell phones allowed and like one person would sneak in under their blanket. And I don't know, I just was like, this is super fun. And I felt like I started to experience life and it was because of music that I got to do that. Yeah, so in terms of Interlochen, I went back the next summer and I got this offer to be a part of the very first North American Viola Institute. It's called NAVI. Okay. And they held it at Interlochen that year. So I applied and got in, and it was like a week-long institute. And I took all of my exams for like high school and stuff early, like all of the above, and so that I could leave because it started, I don't know. I mean, I feel like the like New York schools, for example, you know, they end very late in June, and Connecticut is very similar. But the institute was like the second or third week, so I finished everything early. This was my what year was this? My sophomore year. Okay. And so I went there and I met the teacher there. There were like people like Heidi Castleman, who's well known from Juilliard, Yuta Sedot, who teaches up in Montreal, and then Mr. Holland, who was the previous viola teacher at Interlochen. And he was like, you should come here. And I was like, that sounds amazing. So I spent the rest of the summer begging my parents to go, and they were able to give me like, you know, enough financial aid for it to be possible. So finally, like 2 weeks before school was supposed to start, my parents gave in, and there we are.
I always imagined what it would be like going to a school like Interlochen for high school, because I think many of us, when we were maybe kids, read Harry Potter and were like, boarding school, going away to school for a whole, you know, academic year. How incredible would that be? And I always thought when I started getting into music, I was like, oh, maybe places like Interlochen are kind of like that. Was it anything like that?
You know, as an avid Harry Potter reader, I guess I didn't really think about it that much when I was there, but I definitely loved it. I just like, I don't know, my like at home, like the stuff that was at home wasn't really for me. And I think it was one of those things where I would have been traveling to New York or Boston to do the next step. So it was like either we go and do that or I go to Interlochen. And I don't know. I made my first ever abroad trip when I was like 12 or 13 too,
Wow.
with the viola group that was at the Hart pre-college.
Cool.
And I think I've never been like I like to be out and I don't know, I'm that type of person.
Yeah.
I like to meet new people and I've always been kind of extroverted. My mom is the same way. So I think they knew at some point there was like no holding me back.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, it was great. I loved it. It was awesome. And I mean, it's so cool at Interlochen because unlike some, like most music conservatories, it's all the arts. So it was, you know, I participated in things with dance and I participated in things with film and there were, you know, creative writing workshops and theater. And yeah, like my roommate for both years was a theater major. And it was like, it was awesome.
That is amazing.
Yeah. So, and then you get to meet people from all over, and those friends are definitely friends that I still have large connections with.
Yeah.
And it's crazy, like similar to Eastman, you know, you run into people from Interlochen and Eastman, like all over the place. So,
yeah, that's cool that you mentioned. I had never thought about Interlochen being for all of the arts, and whereas a lot of music schools and music conservatoires are solely music. And when I went to do my master's in London at the Guildhall School of Music and Drama, something that I found really cool was the drama aspect of the school and getting to collaborate with actors and just even going to go see their performances. They were amazing. And I feel like, bringing different art forms together is really exciting. And so the fact that you got to explore that even at such a young age is really cool.
Yeah, I think it's nice too because you kind of get to start, I mean, it's kind of like literally a pre-college atmosphere too, right? And I also like the academics there. I was a very academic person, and the academics there were incredible. Like I remember still my favorite class of all time there was a Western thought philosophy class. It was actually called the Western Thought and the American Mind or something like that. It was taught by this guy. Mr. Dean, I don't remember his first name, but he's since retired. But it was so cool. It started, you know, all the way in the early teachings of Socrates, and it brought you all the way to more modern thought. And I just thought that was so, I don't know, it was so incredible. But yeah, I remember taking the final exam, and it was literally on all of philosophical thought, throughout all of time until this, you know, whatever. And so then when I came to college, it was like a no-brainer studying for music history exams and stuff because you're used to it. But yeah, I thought that was just nice just because of all the different artistic ventures there. I feel like the education kind of catered to that a little bit more to entice everyone. So I thought that was really valuable too. But yeah, living in a dorm when you're 15 and 16 years old is awesome. There, you know, you have to have your door open when you go to someone's room, but then you're in your room with your friends all the time. That's the best thing ever.
Close to everyone.
And all the practice rooms there are underneath the dorm, so you don't even necessarily have to leave to go practice. And I don't know, I don't know. It was awesome. I think it's just what I needed. It fit me, and I don't think what I would have gotten here traveling and doing things just on a Saturday or Sunday would have given me. So I value it for that too.
Amazing. So when did you start thinking? I guess you were already on that track of, you know, focusing on music. So were you already thinking, you know, music schools, auditions, conservatoires, and what was the thought process behind applying to schools and then deciding on Eastman?
I mean, I definitely did want to do music. I knew that. I mean, as most parents do, they want you to go to a state school so that they don't have to spend as much money. But that just wasn't what I wanted to do. So I think I took 7 or 8 auditions or something. My dad drove me to all of them, which is nuts. But yeah, I just remember when I came here, I loved the atmosphere here. That was the best part. The welcome committee on audition day was so great. And actually, I remember specifically Austin Fisher.
Oh my God.
Who was the class who graduated before us. He was a cellist, and he was the one who greeted me and showed me around in the morning and made me feel at home. And I remember being this is really cool. And you know, violas are always kind of chill. So I remember walking into the room with Mr. Taylor and Miss Rodland and Mr. Ging, and them joking around and me being why are they laughing? Should I laugh too? You know, all those things you think. And so I just kind of knew that was the place for me. And I thought about also going to University of Michigan. That was one of my other deciding schools, but there was something about Eastman that just felt really special.
So you decided on Eastman. Could you talk some about your experience at Eastman, some of the things you got up to, and what were your career goals and aspirations for what you were thinking when you would come out of Eastman?
I don't know like what your experience was like, but I loved Eastman.
Yeah.
And I know that I feel like we were part of a really special era at Eastman because I've heard from people who like went after us and things like that and just had different experiences. But I feel like our experience at Eastman was just so special. I really valued just like I love my teacher, Professor Roblin. I think that we were like a good match, and she taught me a lot. And I was a very like stiff, tense person, and she helped loosen me up a lot, which is great because playing injury free is really important.
Yeah.
I think like best friends that I made were awesome. And I mean, I'm not like a huge fan of like oral skills and theory and those things, but I definitely think like what we learned in terms of ear training at Eastman specifically like has made me a way better musician. Like I feel like there are certain things where I can just like hum anything or catch a pitch or do all those things, and so I think the education was really valuable. I don't know, I just feel like all around I had a really great time at Eastman. I mean, obviously like any institution that you go to, there are things that annoy you, right? Like, oh, I have to go to orchestra, and like, oh, I have to do this rotation, and those things. But I had a really good time there, and I feel like I made really valuable friends.
And were you thinking a sort of orchestral career while you were at Eastman, or did you have thoughts about what job you would want to get after you graduated?
I mean, I think orchestra, because that like made most sense. I remember being told by a couple professors at one point that like I wasn't good enough of a player to like be an orchestra musician, so I should just go teach, which I thought was really interesting. But I think also like teaching is not easy, so I don't know why that would be an easier route. But then I was like, okay, well, I'm gonna like prove you wrong. And then I think the only other thing like I remember finding like a little bit difficult was like I had to pay, unlike like a lot of other students at Eastman, I feel like I had to like pay for my own rent and things like that. And so I did have a part-time job at like one of the local restaurants. And so that was always like hard, I think, to finagle sometimes too and balance. But I mean, I think just like the support at Eastman is awesome. I think like one of my favorite parts I always talk about is when we had juries and everyone would be practicing and everyone would visit each other's rooms and like listen to each other and like, all that stuff. And I just felt studio support was such a big thing throughout all of the studios I thought at Eastman. Like if someone has a recital, you attend. If they're playing, you attend and you like support each other, and that's how it works. And that's definitely something I've applied into my life, even as like a hairstylist, right? Like you go, someone I graduated with is doing a new service, like I'll go be a model for them, or I'll go pay for the service. And even if it's new, or maybe it's not as good or something, the support matters. Like, because I mean, you want your friends and people to be successful just as much as they want you to be successful.
I agree completely. I really felt that Eastman was very good at fostering community, and the support that you felt from your peers and from the faculty was really amazing. I felt like that really defined my time at Eastman, and especially coming back now 10 years later, it still feels the same. I still feel like welcomed back into the community, which is really special. I don't know if that's the same experience for other people, but I'm really grateful that that was ours. And the other thing you were saying that I really thought was interesting was, how you were working at, did you say cafe or a bar?
So, I was working at like a bar and restaurant around the corner.
And I had 4 jobs at Eastman by the time of my last year, and I totally understand like balancing that with performance studies at Eastman is intense, and I definitely felt like, I'm not getting in the same amount of practice hours and focused, musician time as maybe I saw other students doing, because I was busy running around working all of these jobs because it's very expensive, and but I did feel that the things I got from those jobs was also very valuable, and I learned so much, and all of my jobs were actually at Eastman.
That's cool.
Which was really cool. I think it would be really interesting as well to have gotten a job sort of outside and maybe gotten more of the Rochester feel and community, because I didn't feel very part of Rochester. I just felt part of Eastman. So I wonder if that job helped you maybe connect more with the Rochester community?
Yeah, I mean, I think like what was hard probably similarly for both of us was, you're talking about getting in practice time. And I used to feel like I wasn't going to be as good because music wasn't like my sole focus or something.
Yeah.
But in retrospect, like now that I look at it, it taught me how to practice better because you had to do the same amount. Yeah, you had to do the same amount of work in a smaller amount of time. So it made you really focus or find out ways where you could achieve the same thing without having to do like X over X amount of hours. But yeah, I think I definitely connected with the Rochester community. I mean, that's how I met my husband working at that restaurant. So
well, there you go.
So yeah,
very much
yeah. One of my coworkers was his roommate, and that's how we first met way back then. I mean, I went to a lot of the specifically in Rochester, similar to New York City actually, which I found when I moved there. But the restaurant industry is very connected, and so I felt like I got not only like a tour of kind of the culture of Rochester in terms of like food and just like outside life and things. But I feel, you could tell when you met like people who were of value, who like were known in the community and could show you things, and you could go to like, I don't know, a show at the Bug Jar or something like that. Yeah, I don't know. It made me have a connection to this city that was more than just Eastman, which I think was both valuable, but also could be stressful at times, right?
Pros and cons.
Yeah.
But that's cool. Yeah, I was chatting to a freshman just a couple days ago when I was going around doing stuff at Eastman for Meliora weekend, and she was asking me, what did you do for fun at Eastman? Like, how did you get outside of Eastman? And I was like, oh, it's a hard question because I didn't have a car when I was at Eastman.
Yeah.
So I would just walk between the buildings.
Right.
And I was like, I walked down East Ave and went to Wegmans, and that was my fun activity,
Yeah.
But it's really cool that you were able to get a little more integrated into, the city and experience that. And now you're here living and, part of the community. And so it's cool that sort of came back around for you.
Yeah. Speaking of cars, I guess that was a plus too. Everyone that I worked with had a car, and they would sometimes let me use their car. So,
That's what I told the freshmen.
Yeah.
It's like, maybe just try to find some friends who have a car because that really helps.
It does. Yeah. I was like, I actually went to Buffalo once when I was here at Eastman, which I feel like if you don't have a car, you wouldn't do that.
I never went to Buffalo. Well, there you go. Top tip for you.
Yeah.
In case you end up at Eastman.
Right, exactly. I liked Rochester better, if that makes anything.
It's cool. As in, there's a lot more outside of just Eastman that you can experience. It's okay if you don't, because I had a great time at Eastman even without that. But it's just nice to hear about your experience and how you were able to plug in different ways. And I think that's cool.
Yeah.
So when you were thinking about next steps after Eastman, were you definitely thinking a master's the whole time, or were you thinking about trying to work more, or how was that? Because I know you ended up doing a master's, right?
Yeah. So I had a really hard senior year at Eastman, mentally. I was just struggling a lot. And I think it was some personal things, but also, I don't know, when you're a senior and you have a lot of that stress. So yeah, I took auditions my senior year for schools, but none of them worked out. And I was really embarrassed by that for a long time, especially people who applied to the same places and they got in and, I'm not anyone that I think I'm a great violist. Do I think I'm the best musician ever? No. But do I think there are certain things that I'm good at that sure, I deserve a job like this? Yeah. I mean, and so do a lot of other people. And I think I was just I don't get it. I worked really hard for 4 years and I feel like I'm good at what I do to a level where I should get in.
Yeah.
So that was really hard, but I actually ended up, I really wanted to study with this teacher, Karen Richard, who teaches both at NYU and Manhattan School of Music. And so Professor Rodlin, she connected me with Karen, and we agreed that I would move to New York City and study with her during my year off and just re-audition. So that's what I ended up doing.
Wow. Yeah. I really appreciate you sharing that, because I hadn't realized actually that there was a gap year.
Yeah.
And that, I can absolutely understand how it would feel embarrassing at the time not to have gone into grad school. I love the resilience that you showed of you know what, I didn't make it this time, I'm going to try again. I'm going to take steps to better make it possible to make it happen. And I think that's really relatable, and not everyone's going to get into, the schools that they want to. So I think that's really important just to know and to realize, even if you don't get into all of the schools you apply to, it's not the end of the world.
Right. Well, and even if you do get in, I mean, there were places that I got in, but I just couldn't afford. Like, I'm paying for grad school all by myself. My parents were gracious enough to help me with a certain percentage of undergrad. And I was lucky enough to get a good amount of scholarship to help cover most of that. Yeah. So, sure, I get in, but if I, if they give me $1,000 and it's like $60,000 to go, that's like not something that I can just afford. And so I had to be realistic like that too. And that was something, similarly, I was also like you said, embarrassed about. I was like, oh, now I just feel like a poor person. Which I feel like happens to a lot more people than is talked about. And I wish that, it was more talked about, because it's so much more than just how good you are. It's like being a musician is so much more about well-roundedness and just like life circumstances and things. And it doesn't happen the same for everyone. But of course, when you're, I don't know, how old was I? Like 21? I mean, it was like tears forever and existential crisis and I'm a terrible human and, all that stuff. So, I wasn't necessarily so gracious about it, but, you do what you got to do.
And I think, things work out the way they're supposed to and you end up where you're supposed to be. And I think, a lot of times, like you say, it's not always the best musician always gets the best, gets the jobs or whatever. Like, there's a lot of factors that come into play. And I think, even when you're auditioning at a bunch of schools, like you're saying, there's just a lot more factors that come into play.
And then, so I went to New York. I moved there after the summer after graduation. And I worked like the whole summer at the place I was working here and then moved to New York. And I remember like so many people telling me like, oh, you're never going to make it. And, because I'm like too nice or like whatever. Well, I got like a full-time restaurant job at a fine dining restaurant, down in the Soho, like Bowery area in New York within like the first 24 hours there. And that's what I did full-time for a year. I worked like a bajillion hours at this fine dining restaurant. No longer exists, but it was called Pearl and Ash. And it was an up and coming restaurant. That year had been open for like, I think 6 or 8 months at that time. I got to serve like all these famous people, like Cedric Diggory, and I got to serve Sarah Jessica Parker,
oh my god,
Aziz Ansari, like Julian Michaels, like all these Joshua Bell, which I was the only one. Language. And again, like I felt embarrassed by that, but I mean, I really lived life that year because you can make so much money working in a career restaurant in New York. I mean, I dined at I got complimentary dining seating at all these really famous restaurants in New York City, like Michelin starred restaurants. And I made I lived in this crap apartment with 2 other actually Eastman graduates. And so then I was able to just save a ton of money, but also then use any extra I had to just do whatever I wanted. And so, I mean, I would do a lesson once every 2 weeks because that's what I could afford as a part of my budget in terms of putting away. And I just saved a bunch of money and reapplied for grad school. And then I got into Manhattan School that next year with Karen Richer, with more scholarship. And then I was able to pay for a certain portion and then took out loans for the rest that I will die with. But that's what I did to survive. And, I wasn't the only person there doing that. I mean, one of my best friends from New York City was a dancer, and she graduated from NYU Tisch, and we were working there together, and we worked in several restaurants after that with each other. And now she dances for the Met Ballet, and she runs this amazing program in New York called Art Bath NYC, and it brings all artists together through donations and stuff to create these multiple events. She's done the same thing in her hometown in Colorado. I mean, they're actors, all that kind of stuff. So I also felt like I was part of a similar community when I was working in the restaurant business because it was basically all artists.
I was thinking that because I was thinking the typical story you hear about actors and actresses is you go to Hollywood or New York or whatever and you work as a waitress. You work in restaurants, and that's very much, I think, the narrative that we hear about that industry, but I don't feel like you hear it much in our industry. But I imagine, like, it must be very prevalent and, like, because you do what you have to do to survive.
Right. And the hours are, like, more flexible, or they're, you know, you can create them around your schedule. Like, when I started my master's in 2014 at MSM, I was working at this place called Alder NYC, who actually the owner, the chef was named Wiley Dufresne, and his old restaurant WD50 had closed, and this was like the sister restaurant. And I just worked Friday nights, Saturday nights, and Sunday, like brunch hours, and that worked with like my school schedule until it didn't. But yeah, I mean, it was just it was kind of a nice way to do that. And I don't, as much as I hated working in a career restaurant because I didn't really care that much about that being my lifelong thing. I learned so many amazing things about food and wine. And I really value that part of my life. I love eating and drinking my way through every place I visit. And I think it's such a great way to learn about the culture, to meet people. I went to Paris at the end of 2019 for an audition, and I went by myself, and I went to a Southern restaurant after, the first day of auditions, and I ate at a family style table and made friends with 7 people who barely speak English, and we shared a meal. And I don't know, it's you can find all these commonalities, and that's something my husband and I share too. I mean, we have a whole Google Doc of all of our favorite restaurants and why in Rochester, because there's a lot of special stuff here, and it's a really valuable way to get to know when we're talking about community and the culture here. It's a really great way to get to know that. So I do value it for that as well. Plus it makes me sound smart when I'm around people who are I'm this wine has and then you just sound smart and intellectual. So, and then also in turn, I tell people this too, any students that have talked to me about similar types of things, with finances and having to have jobs that I've had and whatnot, that, I talking to people and knowing how to do that and be someone who's personable and can be flexible in that way is so important to having a life in music. I mean, you think about donors and sponsors and giving, being able to present yourself on a stage, what you're doing now, doing interviews, that's something that's quite essential, I feel to being a successful musician. I mean, you look at people like Yo-Yo Ma who present themselves like that all the time. And I think I learned a lot of those lessons when working in these non-music jobs.
That makes sense, because even thinking of a waitress, someone who's serving in a restaurant, you're meeting new people all the time. You're having to be, or you're representing your restaurant, and you're on it all the time. You have to be flexible. You have to remember things, paying attention to detail. All of these little things that you might not realize translate to music, you're having to use them and develop them on the job.
Yeah, and vice versa too. I mean, I could memorize what's on a menu because of all the memorization that we had to do for music. And I feel in most regards, musicians get hired for a lot of things, and they're looked at a lot more in non-music jobs than you would probably think, because they know that we practice diligence and self-discipline and all of these knowledge and having to memorize and learning all these things, and stage fright, for example. I mean, you have to get over the stage fright at some point as a music major, because you have to perform a recital, and that matters, when you walk up to people and have to talk to them and not feel awkward. And so I think too, I found it very easy throughout my life to get non-music jobs, but I think that's because of the background that we're given through music too. So it goes both ways.
Definitely. So while you were at Manhattan School of Music, what was that master's experience like? So it's 2 years?
Yeah, 2 years. Yeah.
Okay. How was that different than your undergraduate at Eastman? And had your career aspirations or goals changed at all during that time, or was it pretty steady?
Sure. I mean, I'm just gonna say it because I I hated Manhattan School of Music.
Oh no.
I absolutely hated it. I thought it was a trash experience.
I'm sorry.
That's okay. I mean, one of the things they did, for example, was redo the cafeteria the second year that I was there, and they deducted $5,000 away from, they added on $5,000 to everyone's scholarship. It's not like Eastman where they, if you come in with one set tuition, it's like that for all 4 years. And that was really hard because so many people, I mean, if it was sort of like this at Eastman, but especially in New York City, like so many people that study there are wealthy. And I just think like it's kind of lost on people when those things happen because they're not taking care of it. Where there was one point similar to you, I was working 5 jobs and going to grad school. I was working in 2 different restaurants. I was teaching at 2 different places. And I was also, I was doing like some nonprofit work or something somewhere. And still being able to maintain grad student. And I feel like I was like an awesome person, but it's the same type of thing. You feel embarrassed. Someone, oh, can we rehearse this? Oh, I'm always the problem because I have like this job or, you know, whatever. But I will say I loved my teacher. That was like definitely awesome. The school itself I hated, but I loved my teacher and I loved the chamber music experience that I had there. The American String Quartet is there. And I got really lucky to be put as a part of an awesome sextet for both the years. And we were just like super like gung-ho about everything. So that was really great because it's always nice to play with people who take it as seriously as you do. Yeah, and so we like did a couple of competitions and that was really fun. And yeah, I mean, I think overall a lot of what grad school was. So I feel like Eastman for myself was like, okay, getting like tension free and getting set up and just acclimating. And then, and I think a lot of this was because of my teacher, Karen Richards. She's like the best, but I think she just kind of gave me like a smack of reality. And both because she's, you know, done a lot of things in her life, but also okay, like living in New York isn't a joke. Like you're working X amount of jobs and you're going to school, but everyone lives like it's not like Eastman where everyone's in one place, you know? So it was a very different experience. I was like a student and a player at Eastman, but at Manhattan School, I learned to become a musician. And I think that was really valuable. Yeah, I love, and she's still like one of my greatest mentors to this day. Yeah, I love her. I value everything that she's ever done for me. So, so that was cool. It's so interesting too. There's so many, it's where I first learned about like politics and music too, was New York City. Because I just, you know, it's like a bigger city and you don't realize like how certain teachers like don't like each other. So this happens, or like, you know, this school is competing against these school for like these gigs or, you know, all that kind of stuff. It's very interesting, which is not like my style. I'm very much like everyone love each other, but it was good for me. You know, you learn to get like a little bit more hard around the outside and stand up for yourself. And those are really valuable things too. So
yeah. I'm sorry it was an up and down experience. I think the fact that you were able to have such a good relationship with your teacher and that made such a difference, that's really valuable. And I think that relationship is, for a musician, maybe even like the most important thing because it's such a close relationship. I think I imagine, I've never lived in New York City. I imagine even just living in New York City is hard. And so when there's, you know, other factors that are not helping, then it just makes it not the best experience.
Yeah, I think like also I just loved Eastman, and we were talking about community and stuff so much. It was just so different at Manhattan School that it was a little bit shocking. But also you have to remember, you know, like when you're an undergrad, that's more valuable to you than when you're in grad school. Like in grad school, I was there for pursuing like a location that I wanted to be in. I was pursuing a specific teacher to learn things. Like I'd already done the school part, you know what I mean? And all the classes I had to take there were just because I had to take classes. There were some really great ones. I like begged them to let me take a couple piano specific classes because I really love Brahms. He's like my favorite. And there was a Beethoven, Brahms and Schubert class that I really wanted to take, but only pianists were allowed to take it, and I begged them and they let me do it. So that was cool. Like there are some things I learned like really great. But I think, you know, grad school is also a different vibe. I think people are more out of the building than they usually are in and stuff. So even though I didn't like the school, I mean, I think what I was searching for from the experience was what I got, and it was valuable in that regard. So
And I agree. I think masters, the course is generally a lot freer. And I think in terms of community, it's a lot harder to find it because there's not that same sense when you're an undergrad. It's like you're all in it together, and you're all taking all of your classes together, and you literally live in the same building for at least 1 or 2 of those years. The masters, everyone is out doing different things, and so it's a lot harder, I think, to find that sense of community. So and then I think without that, especially in a big city like New York City, it's easy to get lost.
That's for sure. So I was there. I graduated in 2016. I lived in New York until when did I live in New York? Until the end of 2018, actually. So yeah, I worked, by the time I was done, so I took my last full year in the New York area. I was actually in Long Island out by Stony Brook.
Oh yeah.
There were just like some personal things that went on in my life. And I think like after I graduated, I was like in a really good playing place, and I took 4 auditions. The first one was successful. It was for a regional orchestra and I won that job, which was awesome. It was like right out of school. And to all those haters who told me that I wasn't ever going to get an orchestra job, there you go. So that was really cool. And I was like on a roll. So I took like another 4 that had a similar rep list, and I tanked all of them. And I went into like pure like existential crisis, like depression mode, you know, because you're like, how did this happen? Like I was so prepared, or like I played really well, but they didn't hire me. Like this doesn't make any sense. I like traveled for all this.
Yeah.
So, and then there were just like some personal life events that happened. I was like, all right, I need some space from New York. And at that point too, I'd also been hired to teach at the Manhattan School Precollege. So I had a studio there. So I lived with 2 girls who were going to Stony Brook for their doctorate. Lived out in Long Island. That was awesome. And of course, that was the year where I also ended up teaching in Westchester Music Academy there. That was the year where like everything, I finally had like an all music life. Like I was teaching and performing all the time in New York, outside of New York. And like I didn't have to supplement anything with like a restaurant or any other job, which was cool.
Yeah.
I had like a fun little thing where I worked at a winery on Long Island just for kicks, because I was like, why not? Like I get to taste wine and like talk to people about wine, and then I get paid to do it, and I do it like, I don't know, 5 hours a week or something. But yeah, that was really great too, because I had hit like super rock bottom before I moved there. And I decided to start therapy. I'm like very open about that. I think therapy is awesome. And so Long Island was definitely, living there for 8 months was definitely like a very healing time for me. I learned a lot about myself. And I experienced this again when the pandemic started.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of like what I've noticed that I don't know if it manifested itself like when in music school or not, but I was like, my viola and me are the same, and if I'm having a bad day at viola, then I'm a bad person. If I'm a good day at viola, then I'm a great person, and they directly coincide. And like without my instrument, I don't know who I am, and that's like just really not healthy. And so but I was able to, with the people I was living with and just through the things I was doing, I felt like goals in life. I mean, yeah, I would love like, you know, a full-time orchestra job at that time, but I was playing in a couple regional orchestras and teaching with really great students, both at the pre-college and out in Westchester. And I lived with great people, and it was like right on the water, which was nice. And I was like, you know what? I like can't get mad. I'm like working, you know, 4 days a week, then 3 days off to like do stuff on the weekends or whatever, to travel, all those things. So that was about the time actually I met my husband, reconnected with my husband, and we were dating long distance. And so I had gone the summer of 2018 to spend the summer with him in Rochester to see if it was something like we wanted to pursue.
Yeah.
And at the end of the summer, about a week before I was going to leave, I was hit by a car.
Oh my gosh, Carrie.
Yeah. I mean, it's not funny, but like, yeah, so I was hit by a car, right down on Main Street.
Wow.
And yeah, they were texting while driving, ran a red light, and hit me. And so, yeah, that was terrible. And I actually like had one of the regional orchestras I was playing for had a principal position audition the week after that I've been preparing for. I took it. And it ended up being a no hire, but I was the only finalist. I couldn't move at all, but I just did it because I had been like, I was like, you know what? I don't know if this is still a thing, but YOLO. Like, I'm like just gonna do it. Like, I can barely move, but I can move enough to like say, yeah. And it ended up being like one of the better auditions that I've ever had.
Wow.
Which
Talk
is
about resilience. My gosh.
So I had moved back to New York City because that's where I was going. So I moved back into the city because driving from Long Island just didn't make sense anymore. And I just hated it when I moved back. I was like in pain all the time. I wasn't like with the people that I wanted to be living with anymore. I like missed my husband, and I was like, you know what? This isn't the right fit for me. I'd been there for 7 years, and I wanted more things out of life. And so I made the decision to move back to Rochester. And I contacted the previous principal of the Rochester Phil, Melissa Matson, who taught the rep classes here at Eastman. And I played for her, I think earlier actually that summer before the accident, because I had been taking this audition and I just wanted her to hear me.
Yeah.
And it went really well. And she's like, let me know anytime that you're in Rochester, like maybe you should play with us. So I contacted her and she put me on the sub list. And when I moved to Rochester, I was playing pretty consistently with RPO. So that was really great. At first it was one concert and then it was like every concert. So that was most of what my 2019 was. And then I hadn't met one of your other podcast members yet, but I started working at Luzerne Music Center that summer too. So in 2019. So that was really great. Also because that's where I decided I wanted to be a musician when I was 12. And so I was
thinking because I had known that was in your bio, and you said like I went to Luzerne when you were like 12 or something. Yeah. And I was like, oh my gosh, and now she teaches there.
So special. Cool. Yeah, and it's crazy too because when I first arrived, nothing had been done to the campus. It was literally the same. Like my name carved into the cabin was still there. Like everything was exactly the same as it was back in like 2006 or whatever. And then the year after they were able to start renovations and now it's like all brand new and it's amazing. Lots of like big things in that year. Lots of my stuff in a car. So that's how I ended up back in Rochester. So I was playing with the orchestra and then the pandemic started. But it was that year when I moved back to Rochester, I just felt kind of like lonely. And I mean, I still had friends that lived here from Eastman. For example, Molly Wertz McDonald and was here and stuff. But it's when you're full-time with the orchestra and then someone is like subbing or part-time contract, the schedule sometimes can be different. And so just kind of navigating that. So I decided that I was going to take up better caring for my curly hair as a hobby. So I started like an Instagram page just so I could have it separate for like looking up all the cool like curly hair influencers and natural curly hair stylists and things and following and learning tips and tricks for myself. So that was like started as a hobby for me then.
So that was sort of right before COVID hit, that you were starting to get interested in that. Yeah,
like as something to keep me distracted and keep like me from feeling like depressed or things like that. Like I felt like I had something to do that I could like research. I don't know, like I like school and I like learning. So looking up what certain ingredients do and why they're good for you or why they're bad. And like I didn't realize how many toxins were in like, self-care products and like why they're bad for you and how we can substitute them for other things. So I kind of started that journey as a hobby during that time too.
That's cool. Did you feel like when COVID hit and a lot of stuff for especially, performing arts and things stopped, were you then, leaning more into this hair care hobby, or how did it come out that you started working in hairstyling?
Yeah. So COVID happened and I went into a deep depression, which isn't like funny, but it's realistic. And again, where I realized like, holy moly, like if I don't have viola, I feel like I am just no one. Like I just feel like I'm not worth anything if I can't do, and I couldn't do my instrument because it just wasn't a thing. I mean, Luzerne Music Center, the faculty, we were able to volunteer to like give a recital that summer online, which I did, but other than that, I had I mean, you know this too, like, when is it going to come back? Like, will this ever come back? Like, what do we do? So through really helpful therapy sessions, and also my husband is just like really patient and amazing. I was like, well, you know what? I have this other interest, and like, what if I did that?
Yeah.
And I really like curly hair, and I know a lot, and I have like a following, and like, what if I just like went to cosmetology school? Yeah. And my therapist was like, that sounds great. And my husband was like, you should do that. Wow. That sounds cool. And because, there were things we wanted to do. We wanted to buy a house, and we wanted to start a family at some point, and we had gotten, like, we wanted to get engaged and get married at some point too. And I just, not that, there was one point a couple years before, or even the year before the pandemic, where music paid for my life, but now it didn't. And I didn't know when it would happen again. Yeah. And I think sometimes, you try and, it goes back to when we were talking about earlier, like you feel like you're good enough and you deserve the job, but you don't get it. And you continue to take these auditions. Like I took one in Paris that didn't work out. I took, all these things like over and over, and it just kept not working out. And you could either think of it as I'm terrible at what I do, or this just like isn't the right thing for right now. And I was super, again, embarrassed to tell people that I was going to cosmetology school because I thought they would think I was like a failure at music. But then I just decided I didn't care. And I did have one person actually who was the previous Eastman student that came and sat in my chair once. And was like, oh, I didn't even know you played viola again. I just assumed if you do something else besides music, you just can't be good at what you do. And that's like what people think. And it's unfortunate that people live sheltered lives that think that, because there's so much, I feel like being a hairstylist makes me able to have creative outlets in ways that aren't music, and therefore I'm a better musician. I'm less hard on myself because I've learned to be less hard on myself as a hairstylist. And because I have these other outlets to focus creative energy, I'm less focused and like in a one-track mind zone when I play my instrument. And therefore I feel more open to possibilities, and therefore I feel like I'm a better just player in general. So yeah, that's unfortunate. I think people feel that way. But yes, I was like quite nervous. But the overwhelming support is like insane. I mean, I got so many messages from people like, oh my gosh, I do arts administration. And like this has, I find it supplemental, or I'm like doing a librarian of this. And it was really great because I think like a lot of people are nervous to talk about that they do things outside of music. And that's just the reality. And though I love music conservatories and higher education for what they're worth and what they teach you, there's definitely like you get in this bubble and you forget like what's out here because you're so focused on like learning to become better that I think so with my students specifically, especially when I was teaching at pre-college and when I teach at Luzerne, I try to make sure they're a holistic person, that they like put down your instrument and go play basketball. Like just do it. Because you'll regret it if you don't. So that's kind of how I found my way into that. So my last kind of straw up until this point that I did for an audition is I took an audition in 2021 before I started hair school that fall. And I took it for across the United States for a professional quartet. And it was like the best week of my life playing with them. They did like a whole week where you play and rehearse and record. And I even did some extra shows with them, whatever. It was awesome. I like totally thought I was going to get the job. And they ended up hiring someone from California because they were already there and they didn't want to wait for me to move. Again, like I was like foiled again, but I was like, all right, you know what? But what was cool is that I realized that chamber music is totally my thing. And I like to collaborate more with people. And that's where I play better. I love playing in orchestra, but I don't think the audition process really like suits who I want to be as a musician at this point in time. So I was like, okay, that's good news. Like I can search for more things like that. So that's really great. Then I started hair school in the fall of 2021, and it's an 8-month program here in New York State. You need 1,000 hours. It was like the worst 1,000 hours of my life, but I made it. And I did a lot of, I took initiative and did a lot of like shadowing of local hairstylists. And because I am a curl specialist, I also paid for one-on-one education, both for a woman who's based outside of New York City, and also went to a very famous curl specialist who's out in Reno, Nevada, and did a day with her as well. So that's kind of how we ended up there.
Yeah, and I appreciate a lot of what you're saying, and I think it's a big reason of why I wanted to do this podcast, just to show the many different things that musicians can get up to after they graduate. And like when I knew I was coming to Rochester, I knew I wanted to interview some people for the podcast. And so I was looking at, friends of mine, people that I was connected to that were in the city. I saw your name and I was like, oh, what's Carrie up to these days? And I saw you were a hairstylist and I was like, that is so cool. And I was like, she had like such great hair when we were at school. I can see how that could maybe happen. And I was like, I just found it really interesting. I love seeing all the different things that people can get up to. And if you do music and you go and end up doing a career in music, amazing. But if you do music and you end up doing something else other than music, like amazing. Yeah. And I think it's really cool to see the different things that people can do with the music degree. And I think it's really important that people know that with the music degree, you can go out and do so many different things. Yeah. And I think as long as you're happy, you're healthy, you're, doing the things, like working towards the things that you and your husband, you know, for your family that you want to do, then what else could you want?
Yeah, I mean, and I don't think necessarily that it means this is the end of my music career.
Absolutely,
you know, I mean, I'm turning 32 on Sunday, and
so young.
Yeah, and this is just what fits for right now. You know, I mean, you know, I had to stop playing for a bit this year because I got actually surgery on the injury from the car accident back in February, and I had cervical fusion on my neck, and so I couldn't play for like a long period of time. But I just moved to the salon. I was working as an employee at a salon about 30 or 40 minutes from here. And I moved, this is like 10 minutes from my house, which is nice. And so part of moving here is like I run basically my own little business here for myself. Is to make more time for music. I want to make sure that I do that. And, you know, now I can, if I want to go play a concert on a weekend, or, you know, if the orchestra like asks any of us like, you know, part-time or sub players to play again, like I can adjust my schedule to do that. So because I love doing hair, but music is like who I am, you know, and
it has been for so long.
Yeah. So I also don't think, you know, you should feel stuck to one thing. You know, just because music isn't the most important part of my life now doesn't mean it's not a part of my life. And to be quite frank too, sometimes long breaks are really nice. Like you come back refreshed, you come back with an open mind, with a new perspective. And plus like since becoming pregnant, like I feel like all of my energy is more like gravity centered, so it's like easier to play too, because you're like you get less tense up here, and you're just like I don't know, like so there's that.
Congratulations!
Oh, thank you.
Pregnancy, very exciting, and a new chapter that's going to come. And I think very important to say, like you're still active in music. You're teaching at Luzerne. Are you doing chamber music and stuff at the moment?
I mean, not really, but because I'm still like slowly getting back into things. But I was like doing some chamber music coaching and stuff at Hochstein, and fully support like Luzerne Music Center. I mean, the hope would be to play more, but that also comes with time and figuring it out. And you just kind of, I think it's just part of like being an adult, and you forget when you're like 20 like you don't know what being an adult is. So, and it's fine, please don't, but you know, please don't live your life. But at some point, you know, it's not like I want to be a teacher or someone who tells my students like this is what the reality is, because of course it's different for everyone. But I think it's important to foster like all the parts of yourself that you know feel like, if you feel passionate about something, just do it. Like if you have the means to do it, just do it. Why not?
You don't know where it could lead to.
Exactly.
Like you with your hair hobby, and now here you're a hairstylist. And I think it's also nice to point out that there are seasons in everyone's lives. Of course, we're still pretty young. We still got lots of time. But even in the, 10 years since Eastman, look at all that you've been doing. And you've gone through seasons where you were fully doing your career all in music, and now you're in a season where, music isn't the largest part of your career. It's still part of your career, and that will ebb and flow, I'm sure, as you go on to your future career. So I think it's nice to know, like you were saying, it's not always one thing all the time. There can be bits and pieces that come in and out, and music can be one of those pieces that comes in and out and, grows and lessons given different seasons that you're in your own life. And it's interesting because you forget those type of things, but even you, like hearing you say that about myself, I'm like, oh yeah, like I have done a lot since I graduated, but you forget, right? Because you're so focused on kind of like what went right, what went wrong, like all that stuff. But really, you can accomplish a lot that you don't realize is actually a lot, but it's easier, said than done. Obviously, when you can look back on it, when you're in the moment, it can be kind of difficult, but for sure. What do you see sort of coming up next for you as we're talking about these transition points? So you've just recently come to the salon, so you're building up this business here, and this part of your career, you're saying as you're recovering from your operation, your surgery, that, you're hoping to get more back into chamber music. What are you sort of thinking for what's coming next for you?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of music, I'm not sure. I mean, I guess it'll be kind of interesting to see because I'm having a baby, like how that kind of goes. But the nice...
I'm sorry, I forgot to even mention this. What's coming next?
No, you're right. Yeah. But I think the nice part again about me doing my own sort of business here is that that can be flexible. I can, and so again, like if that's something that I want to come back and really continue to go gung ho, I can. But if I rather focus on music and then do this more of a part-time thing, I can. But I don't know, there's something really valuable again in like with natural hair, specifically like it's, for so long people have been told to straighten it or you're more pretty when it's straight or, until recently it hasn't really become a more like trendy, unfortunately, but trendy thing. So it's really inspiring to help like men, women, and I get a lot of kids here too, which is cute, to just like embrace their hair and like it and understand. And there's a teaching aspect of that. There's a creative aspect of that. All those things that you connect with like music and being an artist that are here too. So yeah, I mean, it helps that I had like a really successful clientele at where I was previously. So though this is further away and you win some, you lose some. Building here, it would be great. And yeah, I think, the more I've been in therapy and then the more that I've experienced like these types of ebbs and flows, the more I feel like not very stressed about what comes forward because it'll like whatever I have to do will just like work out. And
you'll do what you have to
do. And I think, what is meant to be will meant to, and I really do think that that's as stupid and cliche as it sounds. I really think that's what happened. I mean, I ended up here somehow, right? And I ended up in a certain other place before here somehow. And so if it's meant that I'm going to do more music in the next like 5 years, then that's great. But if I'm going to do more hair and music waits till later, then that's awesome too. Like I like both things. So I feel like as long as I enjoy my day-to-day life, I'm pretty satisfied.
Just for people who are curious, could you talk a little bit about what life as a hairstylist looks like?
Yeah. So before this, I was at an employee-based salon, which is you get commission a certain percentage of every service that you do. It was awesome. I loved it. One of the reasons I sought it out was one, because the owner was really open and like honest and very communicative, but also the staff was also like, I felt like I learned something from everyone all the time, and I liked that community atmosphere. So similar to chamber music, you're all collaborating and helping each other so that everyone can create their best work, which is great. And it's therefore a good educational environment, which as someone, though I'm older than like a lot of people I went to school with were like 19, 17, 18, 19. And I was 30 when I went, I still have stuff to obviously learn. So that was a really great place to do that. So yeah, I worked kind of like a 5-day work week, different hours. Sometimes I work in the morning, like a 9 to 5 hour, but sometimes I work like a 12 to 8, something like that. But since transitioning here, I try to keep something similar. Like I generally work like between 28 and 30 hours a week. But again, it depends on like, there are seasons just like in, auditions too, right? Like there's audition season and there's season where you like do your summer music camps, and then there's like, back into school. There's seasons here too. So summer and, back to school are always kind of busy, and then it slows down a bit before the holidays and whatever. So you kind of just go with the ebb and flow. But yeah, like a typical service here, like for someone who's wanting their first curl cut will be like an hour and a half, and they'll come in and, we'll talk about their daily life and kind of how they exist both with their hair, but also as a human, right? Because just similar to being a musician, and you learn a lot about them as a person when they play. I learn a lot about people and like what their lifestyle would be and how I can help them by learning about them as a human. So I like to really get to know my clients and then create something that would be best for them, and then give them the tools to do it at home. So that's kind of how it usually goes.
Yeah. That's really cool. And I love hearing the way you talk about it, because it's so personal. And I think especially when you're building up business, I think it's similar to music, right? Like you want to relate to people, you want to help people feel comfortable. I know like I haven't ever put too much effort into my hair, which is maybe potentially obvious, but I feel like whenever I go get my hair cut, I feel like that experience, I realize when I have someone that makes me feel comfortable and that chats to me and just makes it more of an experience than like, oh, I'm just going to come get my hair cut.
Yeah.
And I feel like when you find those people, then you want to go back to them because it's a positive experience.
Right.
And so bringing these skills in that you have of being personable and, you know, able to talk to people and able to pull out from them how you can best serve them and help them. Like all of these skills are coming into play and you're using them, and then I'm sure it will come back around that they'll, you know, love you and want to come back and get their haircut from you in the future and have you help take care of their hair ongoing.
Yeah. A lot of it too is really like therapeutic for that, like the person who's sitting in the chair. I mean, like I'm sure we've all had at least one experience where we've had like a bad haircut from someone or a traumatic salon experience. And a lot of, especially with like natural and textured hair, that comes more often than not. So it's also like a lot of me, you know, using like my own life experience through my own, like, you know, caring for myself and learning about myself to help them through a traumatic time or traumatic experience and give them a positive one to change it with. Yeah. And being able to read those signs too. Like they may say, yes, they want something, but you can tell that they don't. And so it's better to start one way than another. And to let them speak and not overwhelm with like what you're trying to say, which can be hard sometimes because you have an idea in your head and you're excited, but you have to remember to like sit and like let them talk, because what's most important is like making sure that they get the experience that they're looking for. So yeah, it's very interesting. I can't say like it's my favorite every day because it can be tiring, right? Like, I mean, definitely, I don't know how like psychologists and people do it, but definitely like listening to people and having to help them all day is a hard task, especially to make sure that, you know, you're giving them a positive experience in that way too. And you're being genuine about it. I don't want to be fake about it. I'm not good at being fake. It can be really hard. But again, another like valuable like tool in my basket as like a part of like what makes me, I guess, or able to, you know, I don't know. I like it. It's fun. It's something different. Yeah. I like a lot of curly hair cutting is about like visualizing something and then creating it. And I feel like that's so fun. Like you visualize their hair on their face and like what the shape will look like and then creating the outcome with your hands. I mean, it's like, it's cool. Like it's kind of a different experience.
I hadn't thought about it like that. And that's so interesting. And it's very, I think especially for creatives, that's a lot of what you're looking to do, right? But I think for that, obviously it takes some time, but it's maybe a little faster of a result than you get maybe, you know, with music where you're working on something for weeks and months and then, you know, it's maybe not as an immediate of a result that you can see physically. Yeah. But this is, and how rewarding is that? And to see, you know, their reaction as well. It's kind of like all packaged up, you know? Do you know what I mean? Yeah. So that's really cool.
Well, and I'm envious of you and that you're like enjoy social media because it's like another job, like being a photographer.
Oh my gosh,
of hair, like being able to market yourself and like you see all these people. Like I applied to like I took some photos and applied them to like some award ceremonies and stuff this year, not expecting anything because it was like my first kind of full year as a hairstylist. I'm going on year 2. Man, I mean the way that all these business owners who are like rentals or have their own suite or something, I mean they have like all this setup. They hire photographers, they get models, like, and they pay for this all themselves for the accolades. But then people come and see them because they get to see their work, and so it's all these things that I think about too. You know, how can I market myself to show the like who I am and why people want to come to me? And but then you sit there and you're like, okay, but what is that? Yeah. Like, you know, and figuring that out is it's interesting, and it's very, I think, in a way like opposite of music because music can be a lot more introverted. Yeah. But here I'm trying to be like, hi, I'm like good at what I do, so you should come see me. Like, you know, and I found that like really hard for myself to get over at first because I don't know. I don't want to force people to do anything, but also like I feel like I have a talent, and and I like want to show people and get better, and so sure, come and see me. You know, it's weird sometimes to talk about yourself when you know, but you have to because and social media is also just hard. Like I mean, you know, because you do like a lot of really great like technical things, and you're interested in that, and I need to be way better. But even creating like my business cards for like new business, I spent like 5 or 6 hours just hemming and hawing over font and color and like placement and all this stuff. And I was like, maybe I should hire someone. I was like, oh no, that's way too expensive. I can't hire someone, you know?
Yeah, no, it is. And yeah, I really enjoy it most of the time. Sometimes it gets really frustrating. And yeah, I think I'm very over analytical and perfectionist, and that can be pros and cons. And, you know, like it's great for trying to make things really excellent, but it's not great in some ways for social media because I will obsess over every little thing. And, you know, social media is a lot about getting content out there and, you know, just putting it out there, and some things will land and some things won't. But I feel like the more I do it, the more I feel like I've gotten more to a place where I'm like, I'm just going to create what I want to create and put it out there. And if it does well, then amazing. And if it doesn't, then that's okay. And, you know, and I think the cool thing is similar, I guess, what I was saying about your hair experience and, you know, being creative with that and seeing almost a pretty quick result is how I look at social media. Because I'm like, oh, I can create something and put it together decently quickly and put it up, and you can get almost immediate feedback, which is really fun and really cool. It's not like it took a while to get there, and there's plenty of content that I put out into the world that has gotten no feedback whatsoever, you know, and that's discouraging and that's hard. But this theme of resilience that I feel a lot is in your story is what, you know, like you just keep doing it. You just keep on with the grind, and you just keep putting stuff out there, and, you know, eventually some things maybe take off, and that's cool. And so
you're so cool, Rebecca.
Oh my God. I didn't even ask you to say that.
You know, I think about sometimes too, like when I'm doing music, I've always been such a perfectionist, and like you're so focused, and so much of I feel like what I've done since my master's is try and get out of that zone and have a more holistic view. And it's so funny because with hair it's the exact opposite. Like I'm very good at the holistic view, but sometimes I'm like, wow, I really wish I was like a little bit more technical. Like I don't know, like we were talking about, you know, visualization, like I visualize a shape or something. And that's what I create. How I get there, I mean, sure, I've taken like classes and, you know, done one-on-one training and education with certain foundations to get there and things, but I also like making stuff up. Like I like being like, what if I cut here? And then like, you know, and I mean, I think that's, you know, I took a class once where this woman was doing a cut with a straight razor for someone's hair. And she was like, and you just swoop here, and then you just like, who cares if it's not straight? And I was like, she is my spirit animal, because that's what I do. Like people be like, don't you want that parting to be straight? I'm like, well, it's more organic if it like kind of flows and whatever. And then sometimes I'm like, well, should I be parting more straight? You know, but like, I mean, the result is like generally always good. So it's, I you know, whatever. But it's interesting. Like I started noticing that when I was doing hair, and I was like, why am I not like this with music? Like, why can't I just like be this like free, you know? So it's interesting when you find parts of yourself that like that coexist, but also are like completely opposite. And you're like, how does that even happen?
Well, and now maybe that you've like recognized it on both sides, you can start trying to bring parts of that to the other side. You know, bringing that free spirit creative to the music side, and the vice versa of like, oh, the nitty gritty detail oriented side to the hair stuff. But it's all experimenting and exploring and, you know, learning as you go. Very cool. Well, thank you so much for sharing that. I love to end all of my interviews with a quick Q&A.
Okay.
Top of mind, you know, what you're thinking today.
Okay.
Basically.
Okay,
So
cool.
let's do it. Who's your favorite composer?
Brahms. Yeah. Or Corelli. That's really very different, but both, it's always between those two.
Very cool. Your favorite piece of classical music?
Ooh, Brahms 4 Symphony.
Very good.
Yes.
I will go back and listen to that.
Or the Brahms cello sonatas, either one of those two. So good.
Very nice. How about favorite movie soundtrack?
Oh, you know, this is...
It's a hard question.
It is. And it's also interesting because my husband is not a musician, but he is he like loves movie soundtracks. And so he knows all this stuff, and I know nothing about Harry Potter.
Yeah.
I guess.
That's a great one.
Yeah.
I mean, John Williams, you can never go wrong.
Can you count also the theme song to the Great British Bake Off?
Yes. 100% yes.
I go around the house all the time. Do, 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 do. Like,
I love that. Oh my gosh. Just 2 nights ago, I went home. I'm staying with this super kind family of the church I used to go to when I went to Rochester. So I've been staying with them. I got home after a long day, and the mom was like, oh, trying to find something to watch. And I was like, oh, I'll watch with you. And she was like, would you want to watch The Great British Bake Off? And I was like,
so good.
100% yes. I spent 7 years of my life living in London.
Yeah.
It was an integral part of culture and society.
Yes.
So we sat down, and the introduction is the same as it was
I know.
for the first season. And I was like, oh, this feels like home.
I know.
Yes, you can say that.
Okay.
Amazing. What genre of music do you listen to most of the time?
Like ratchet music, like Beyonce or like something like that. I mean, my favorite non-classical person is probably either like Sarah Bareilles or
I love Sarah
or Don't Hate Me but John Mayer. So it's the New England in me. I can't help it.
His music is good.
Yeah.
His music is good.
Yeah. His voice is sexy. I don't know if that's allowed in the podcast.
It's fine. We'll let it slide.
His voice is nice.
Version. Beautiful. Yeah. And I love Sarah Bareilles.
Yeah.
I got to see her do Waitress live in London. And she wrote that musical.
Yeah.
And then she was performing it, singing the main parts. And I was like, this is
so great.
Heaven. She's so talented.
Yeah.
Yeah. Amazing. What are you currently reading?
I am reading a book that I can't remember the name of, but it is about a woman in India who is married off at 14, and she travels to a completely different part of India, and it's about how her life progresses from there. But the last full book I read was by a fellow musician, Ling Ling Huang, the sister of Frank Huang, some of you might know, is the concertmaster of New York Phil. And it's called Natural Beauty, and it was great.
Oh.
It was so great. I read it in like 2 days.
Amazing.
I loved it. Yeah, so I highly suggest it.
Perfect. How about the last thing you listened to?
The last thing I listened to was probably Smash Mouth in the car on the way here. Yeah.
Good times.
Yep.
Good times. How about a musician you really admire?
Oh, Stephen Isserlis. Or, Stephen Isserlis. I really admire him. And Janine Jansen, violin player. Yeah.
Amazing. And then finally, if there was one resource, so a book, a podcast, a movie, an article, just some resource that you think would be really beneficial for someone to check out right now, what would you say it is?
Ooh. Okay, there is a book actually by one of our fellow classmates, Lauren Haley.
Oh.
And she wrote this book, I think it's called The Art of Practicing.
Wow.
I'll have to remember exactly what it's called. But I actually created like a little YouTube series during the pandemic.
Oh my God.
About like trying to help parents and kids practice at home. And I read through Lauren's book and it was awesome. It was just, and it dives a lot into kind of the psychology behind it too. But it was really great. And I valued that because it takes things more step by step. And I think she dives into like the reasons why behind it. But it's not just a like, do this, do this, do this, which is what we get a lot from our teachers. It's more, like, why are you doing this? Like, if you do it, like, if you practice when you wake up, like, it makes it become more a part of your daily routine and you don't even think about it and becomes less of a chore and more of something you, like, want to do because you feel good when you start your day with, like, 15 minutes of just playing open strings or something like that, you know, and how you can work it into your daily life. So I would say that I also read multiple times The Inner Game of Tennis, and that was really great too. But the first couple of times I read it, I didn't really understand like why it was important until I got there like mentally, you know. So I think early on in someone's career, like if they're still in school and stuff, it's good to read it, but then put it down and like come back to it like 5 or 10 years later, and then reread it again to see like, oh, I understand like what they were trying to say, you know. But yeah, the art. I think it's called The Art of Practicing. I'll have to
double check and I'll make sure to link it. Yeah, cool. That's really helpful. And I guess just thinking along those lines of what you're saying, if there was a last piece of advice that you'd want to give to young musicians or people sort of at that transitional point in their careers, what would you say?
Yeah, I mean, my first inclination would be like, everyone go to therapy. But if I were to give something besides that, I think it would just say, don't be embarrassed to explore the possibilities.
Yeah.
Yeah. And if you are, find that one person who feels open to hear about it, because that person can be really helpful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's so important. And I feel like you really have shown that throughout your musical journey, and I feel like there's so much resilience in everything you've been overcoming and just pushing through and finding the ways that you can make it work all the way through. And yeah, it's really inspiring to hear. So thank you so much for sharing.
Thanks, Rebecca. I'm happy to be here.
Amazing. Well, I'm really excited for what's to come for you with, a new baby on the way. And yeah, I'm sure you'll be up to cool things. If there's a way people can connect with you, if people are in Rochester and want to get their hair cut by an amazing hairstylist and curl specialist, how can they find you and connect with you?
Email is always great, but I do have an Instagram. It's do I even have to say that anymore? Sugar curls, the letter N, spice.
Okay.
Yeah. So just think of the Powerpuff Girls.
Perfect.
If anyone still knows what that is. Yeah.
I know what that is.
But yeah, that's kind of hair wise. That's kind of, you can see what I'm up to. And sometimes I post music videos for fun there.
Cool.
So yeah.
Amazing. And do you want to shout out also the salon that we are in?
Oh yeah. So thank you so much to Abby Sullivan, who owns this salon. It's called Ash and Ivory. It's hair coloring and hair extensions. There are 3 of us here, and we all do different stuff. And it's a really nice place, downtown Rochester.
Yeah. It's super cute.
Yeah.
So if you want to check it out.
Yeah. Awesome.
Cool.
Thanks, Rebecca.
Thank you, Carrie.
Thanks for tuning into this episode of the Orchestrating Your Career podcast, and a big thank you to Carrie for sharing all the twists and turns and lessons learned of her musical journey so far. If you enjoyed this episode, it would be a huge help if you gave this video a like and or leave a comment below with a takeaway from this episode, and let me know if any of Carrie's story resonated with you as well. The resources mentioned in this episode and where you can connect with Carrie are all linked below. You can find the podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and other platforms, as well as get more frequent updates on Instagram. To watch videos of all the episodes and get extra behind-the-scenes content, check out the YouTube channel Orchestrating Your Career. Subscribe so you don't miss anything. Share this episode with a musician or anyone else you think might be interested, and look out for new episodes on the 1st and 15th of every month. Next episode's conversation will be with David Young, a bassoonist who studied at Northwestern University and then the University of Maryland. He spent 4 years in the United States Marine Band and is now assistant principal bassoonist of the National Symphony Orchestra. Look out for his episode on February 15th. Until next time, here's Carrie's viola performance to finish out our episode. So Carrie, take it away.